Our next speaker is a Ph.D. in urban planning. Please welcome to the Terp Talk stage, Zubin.
This compares me to tell a joke. I've only seen stand-up comics do this. But I'm going to talk about something much more serious. Have you ever got a feeling that the world is on fire? That something is seriously wrong with the world we live in? I mean, just look at the geographies listed up here, and you can start feeling depressed just looking at these names. Because every name has a story attached to it and not a positive story. But this kind of a feeling brings us to two questions. The first one is, was it ever really different than it is today? And was it ever really better? My story begins a little earlier, in 2006, when things were all in black and white, by the way. But in 2006, I was an architecture student in Sydney, and from my little corner apartment in Sydney, the world looked exactly the same to me. It still looked like it was on fire. Things were terribly wrong. I remember Iraq, the bloodiest year since the war had started in 2006, 30,000 plus deaths. India, the country where I'm from, and my favorite city in India, Mumbai, suffered major terrorist attacks, and we had 200 deaths. And I remember watching those attacks on TV and coverage of those attacks on TV and thinking those were the suburban trains that I was riding every day. So for me, to remember that feeling of calling every friend I had frantically to check if they were alive was a depressing feeling. And I really thought the world was on fire, and I decided to do something about it. So I said, okay, I'm going to equip myself to tackle at least one problem in this world in a way that I can. And I decided that the problem that I was going to focus on was going to be ethnic violence. And as Diane's research shows us, that studying something like ethnic violence is not really very much fun. And I went very quickly to that point where I realized that this is really, really depressing. And if anyone has studied ethnic violence, you know it. If you have read this material, you know that it can be really damaging and really, it saps away all the hope. But honestly, that would not make a very good Terp talk. So, I'm going to talk about what happened after I started doing my research on ethnic violence, and how I went from hope to hope in terms of understanding and appreciating what we can do as individuals about ethnic violence. So, one of the things I learned very quickly was that ethnic violence is largely concentrated in cities, which is good news of sorts, because what it means is that we know where the problem is now, so we can attack it there. But every good news, when it comes to ethnic violence, must come with bad news also. And the bad news is the world is urbanizing rapidly. So, in 2007, for the first time in human history, the world became majority urban, which meant more people were living in cities than in villages for the first time in human history since we started. And this phenomenon of rapid urbanization is even more common where I come from in India, and like many others who are here from Asia. And even in Africa, we see a rapid urbanization. So in India, when it comes to ethnic violence, this is an astounding statistic that over 51% of all the urban deaths in India related to ethnic violence happen in just 8 cities. So 8 cities have a contribution that is higher than all the other cities combined. And when you add this reality that makes that India today has 54 million plus cities. To put that into perspective, that is DC and Baltimore combined. But to put that into perspective, we have 54 cities that are bigger than San Francisco. And these cities are prime targets for ethnic violence. So what I did in my research is I went to India and I compared 2 cities. One, Ahmedabad, which has seen the most fatalities related to ethnic violence for any Indian city, and the other one was Surat, which is very similar to Ahmedabad, but is surprisingly peaceful. I always say that I think of them as San Francisco and San Jose. They are very, very similar cities, 6 times the size in population terms, but very, very different cultures when it comes to ethnic violence. And in my research, I discovered that there was something happening on a very, very local level that explained this massive difference. And when I say massive difference, I mean the difference between 100 deaths and close to 3,000 deaths. And similar populations, again, similar demographics, ethnic violence along the same ethnic divides, and yet there was this big difference. So, through a lot of analysis of my data and through going through some horrible data of descriptions of ethnic violence and interviews with a lot of people and a lot of local leaders, I finally think I have a small answer to provide. One of the things I realized that a lot of academic literature related to ethnic violence and related to India and other places was making the mistake of assuming one thing for the other. So if anyone knows this story, it's an ancient Indian story I've heard, it's an Arab story of the 6 blind men who are tasked with describing an elephant. And one touches the trunk and says, oh, this creature is like a big snake. The other one touches the tail and says, this creature is like a small snake. The other one touches the feet and says, it looks like a tree to me. And that is what is happening in our descriptions of ethnic violence in cities, which is, I noticed people who were describing Ahmedabad and giving theories and factors of why Ahmedabad had so much violence, were often describing things that I also saw in Surat. So it brought me to the realization that a true understanding of violence is not possible without a true understanding of peace. So you cannot study ethnic violence without studying ethnic peace at the same time, because otherwise you will make the mistake that these blind men made in describing the elephant. The other realization that I had was, if you want to really solve problems, it is not think big. You have to really think very, very small. You have to think on the very local level, and by local I don't even mean the urban level. I mean go down to the street level. I don't know if you can see this image very well, but it's a few steps leading up to a shopping mall in Ahmedabad that I found. And you can see a pantheon of Hindu gods in tile form just along the stairs. Does anyone know why they do this? In India, we have the habit of eating pan, which covers your mouth, and then you have to spit it out. And to prevent people from spitting, you put up a pantheon of gods on there. And then nobody spits on gods. It works. So this is thinking small. This is local level design. You could pass a national, there is a federal law against spitting, by the way, but it doesn't work. It's the local, small scale strategy that works perfectly. So think small, think as local as possible. And the other thing I realized is, not only does this help with preventing small things there, like spitting, or even murder sometimes, what it does is, it brings us to the understanding that the cutting edge of any industry, of any social intervention, is going to be invariably local. And I'll explain this a bit. If you really want to make a difference, you're going to make a difference in a place. And if you want to make a difference in a place, you have to be in that geography. And that's where you can effect the most change. Because it is very easy to look at the world outside and think, this is too difficult to handle. But if you take yourself the actual geography of a certain place and look for the problem in as small a scale as possible, you can actually begin to affect change there. And also, you have to realize that we should be very, very cautious about having any global interventions, any global ideas, because this is the definition of too big to fail. We cannot experiment at this scale. We should not experiment at this scale. So I say, let us think as locally as possible, because when you think locally, when you think small scale, A, you have the opportunity to fail and learn something from the failure without a very big cost. And B, you actually have the power to effect real change. So think locally as much as you can, and you can make real change. Thank you.